the show without asking me, and this is constructive criticism. Michael, how you doing?
I mean, on a scale of here to not here, I am here.
Well, all right then. All right
Yeah,
then.
it's a binary scale.
My wife just texted me just now and says, "Well, I have free Cafe Rio," and to that I say, "Congratulations."
To that I say, you couldn't have texted me 5 minutes earlier.
So Michael's feeling a little sick today, and so I'm sorry to you, Michael. But let's get right into this.
Hang in there.
On this week on the show, we're going to talk about level ups. Also, man, look at us. We don't have a guest this week.
Yeah, it's can't have one every week, so just you and me.
We probably could. I just didn't want to do it again.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on like the quality of guest you're interested in, I suppose, right? I mean,
I guess that's true. I guess, yeah, okay. I agree to that.
I'm sure we could get my mom on the podcast, but I don't know what she'd really add.
That can be a Patreon sub goal. Get Michael's mom on the podcast. Well, speaking of the patrons, you can support the show by becoming a patron. You go to patreon.com/ccmtg. Become a patron of the show. When you do that, it's really appreciated. And we have some new ones. We have Scott, Neil, and Austin are our newest patrons this week, and we just want to give them an awesome shout out. Just to let you guys know that, like, if every person who listening to this podcast donated just $1 or more per month, we could quit our jobs and we could do Magic content full time, and it would be super fun, and we would really enjoy it. Even if you don't do that, if you, I was thinking about this today, and every week I talk about that $1 more per month. But if you think about it, if you donate $3 per month, that means that the same thing is true if 1/3 of the people do that, right? So
by definition, almost.
Yeah, it's a cascading effect. So
it's like that's how math works.
Yeah. So if just think about that, like if you're getting $3 per month value out of the show, we would appreciate it. We also want to give a special shout out to Henry. So every week on the show, we want to be giving a shout out to our newest patrons. And last week, I goofed and I didn't see Henry in the queue. And Henry, I'm sorry. You should have gotten a shout out last week. So I want to give you a special shout out this week and let you know how much I appreciate your support. It really does mean the world to me. And I'm sorry you didn't get your shout out when you were supposed to. I feel bad.
My guess is that most people do not donate money to get shouted out by first name on the podcast, but I could be wrong.
Well, it's important to me that they are recognized. Maybe there's an end screen that our technical producer can put together that has like a scrolling list, like at supersonic speeds of all of our patrons. It's just like at the end.
Yeah, it's like the credits.
Yeah, exactly. That would be funny. I would appreciate that. But yeah, so if you can support us, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg, become a patron of the show. If you are a patron of the show, you are enabled to ask a Patreon question. And this week we have one that says, "Can you talk about the effects of effects like Lost Legacy and Dispossess versus cards like Negate and Manglehorn?" Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I like this question a lot. I think that the biggest thing you'll see if you think about these cards sort of as a style of card rather than as specific cards is that negate basically your opponent has to invest their turn and you get to take it away for 2 mana. Manglehorn delays them a turn and gives you time to either kill them or destroy Marvel, or sometimes you can play it and just actually kill Aetherworks Marvel when it's already in play. And when you look at Lost Legacy and Dispossess, you're sort of making an investment up front that may or may not actually do anything.
Yeah. So, sorry, my glasses are breaking on camera. I have a few thoughts on this. So this comes up because I have for weeks and weeks now encouraged players to stop casting Lost Legacy. And I've probably had more than 30 Lost Legacies cast against me. And I don't think I've ever lost a game where it happened.
I think Lost Legacy is actually uniquely bad and markedly worse than Dispossess in that
I agree.
Dispossess, at least you can sometimes actually transgress the mind them, essentially, right? And they're not
Yes.
then just drawing the card again. But
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of Lost Legacies cast where your opponent has like 2 Ulamogs in their hand.
Yeah.
It's like, do I even want to take these? I don't think so. And that kind of tells you a lot about how these cards line up. Like Lost Legacy, especially, if they actually get to draw cards off it, it's pretty terrible.
Yeah, I have had games where I had 2 Ulamogs in hand, and I was like, thank you. And then they
Yeah.
died.
Yeah, I
because-
mean, I think Ulamogs in hand you mostly should just leave alone. Which
Well, you don't get that option, right? You have to name the card, and then they reveal.
I think you can choose not to exile.
You can. I don't believe you can with Lost Legacy. Let's look.
Interesting.
I don't want to get this wrong because it is a Patreon question, and also
I know that in Magic Online you have to click on them.
choose a non-artifact, non-land card, non-land card name. Search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and/or library for any number of cards with that name, and exile them.
For any number of cards, so you can. I think even if they reveal them, you can
choose 0.
You can choose not to find them. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure
makes
about
sense.
that.
That is not
but
what my Motobo opponent did. He definitely let me draw 2 cards.
Yeah, I've had people do that before once or twice, and I'm always sitting there like. So I mean, I kind of get taking them out of the deck.
That
but
card.
Man, if you're not going to beat Ulamogs in my hand, like, you're in for a bad time, right? I mean, what are you doing there?
I actually might have. I am of the opinion that when you get new information, right, that you should evaluate your opinions, right? I am never going to be the guy that's like, I'm right, you're wrong, end of story. If somebody has new information to give to me, I'm going to evaluate it. And right now on this podcast, I'm giving new information that all of my opponents have been misplaying their Lost Legacies, and now I need to decide if the card's actually playable if they hadn't been doing that.
I still think in general it's not good, and I think in general I would rather play a card that
I would still rather
forces my opponent to spend mana, or will always take a card out of their hand. But yeah, people taking Ulamogs out of your hand on Lost Legacy are doubling down on the badness for sure.
Yeah, and I think that it kind of depends on the texture of your deck too, right? So, like I personally like removing Aetherworks Marvel more than I like removing Ulamog, for example.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think Marvel, especially with like the number of Chandras in these decks going up, in the boarded games, a lot of the time you're going to see some number of World Breaker or like Tireless Trackers, that kind of stuff. Marvel is still a relatively valuable card, in my opinion, where a lot of the time Ulamog, if you're playing a deck that's actually pressuring your opponent, is just not going to be castable.
I also want to talk about those decks pressuring opponents when we talk about a card like this. So Zvi Mauschwitz wrote an article talking about how he really preferred Dispossesses over Transgresses in his zombie deck. And I actually couldn't disagree with that more. And the reason is because I don't think that zombies can afford to take the turns off necessary to play a Dispossess. The difference is between that and something like green-black energy, right? If I play a Grimflare or a Long Tusk Cub, I absolutely can take a turn off to play a Dispossess, right? Like, those things will get through anything that my opponent plays while also removing the card that matters in the matchup.
That makes sense.
In a deck like green-black, I actually like Dispossess. I don't like Lost Legacy in any deck. I think I've still decided that. But Dispossess, I'm actually okay with in green-black.
I just think Dispossess has a way higher chance to actually function as a Transgress the Mind, given that your opponent is likely trying to keep Marvels. You can take the ones out of their hand, and they're not cantripping, right? Like,
and in the hands that they keep Marvels, like I keep a lot of, as a Marvel player, I keep a lot of turn 2 Woodweavers, turn 3 Crack Woodweavers, turn 4 Marvel hands.
Right, hands that couldn't possibly win.
Possibly beat Dispossess. But the hand can beat a Lost Legacy like every time you cast it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly more often than not. And I think also when you're looking at zombies versus green black, it has not just to do with threat quality, but also with like mana curve. Like missing out on playing a Lord on turn 3 hurts zombies more. Just given the structure of their deck.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree.
And I think ultimately a lot of this comes down to like being tempo positive versus tempo negative.
Yeah.
Like negate is a very tempo positive play. Dispossess is a very tempo negative play.
And if you think about it, you like, and the reason I mentioned green black like is those Grim Flares and those Long Tusk Cubs like or even what's the Chew one that gets energy, that your favorite card?
Glint Sleeve Siphoner, yeah.
All of those cards are like reasonable ways to recoup or keep pressure on while playing a Dispossess. Well, like it's really, really easy for Marvel to disrupt your first zombie. And,
Right.
and it's relatively harder for them to disrupt a Grim Flare. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just about quality of threats too, right? Like zombies is much less of a one threat and write it deck, where sometimes green black
exactly.
has hands like that. Yeah.
At the same time, like if you think about something like green black, right? It's like, okay, well, if they dealt with my creature, now I have creature sorcery in my graveyard. I'm halfway to delirium. Whereas if they deal with your creature and zombies, it's like, well, I have one less creature in play.
Yeah, I just basically green black. I feel like ultimately is a lot less about snowballing the board, especially if you look at like the list with Grim Flare rather than necessarily the really high reliance on Constrictor.
Sure.
I just think it's less about getting 6 creatures in play at the same time and a lot more about just playing a threat and then removing blockers.
Let's be clear. There are still all playing Constrictor except for the one that top aided the team event.
Sure. No, so they're still playing but it's about
right.
I think it's about kind of focus and Grim Flare specifically being able to kind of go the distance on its own, like relatively frequently. If it hits you once and then you cast a Dispossess and now you have Delirium, that can just do it on its own.
Let's talk about the reverse though. Let's talk about cards like Transgress the Mind, Negate, Manglehorn. Why are these cards that you're more likely to put in your sideboard, Michael?
So Transgress the Mind is interesting in that it is tempo negative to an extent, but you're also guaranteed some sort of effect out of it, right? Like you will basically never cast a Transgress the Mind in a matchup where you sided it in where it just actually doesn't do anything.
And if it doesn't, for those who are saying like, well, sometimes it misses, it's like, yeah, but if it misses,
it's probably a good thing, right? If they don't have a Whirler or a Rogue Refiner or a Marvel or anything like
Chandra or a World Breaker, right, or whatever.
I don't know what their hand is, but it can't be that great.
Yeah. For as far as like Negate goes, if you were playing Blue Black Control, right? Like you're not bringing in Lost Legacy over Negate. That's just not happening.
Yeah, I think in general you just mostly like a lot of the control decks can struggle with cards like Rogue Refiner and Whirler Virtuoso. And what you really want is to force your opponent to play into your open mana rather than vice versa.
Right.
And I think Manglehorn is a little bit different, but it is a card that kind of demands an answer. Like sometimes you can cast it after Marvel, but often in decks that I've played Manglehorn in, I'm casting it before Marvel and just killing a Thopter or Woodweavers or something like that, or even nothing, depending on the board state, just to essentially make their Marvel come into play tapped.
Sure.
And I think that kind of it's just a more proactive card.
One of the questions in chat is, would you rather have Dispossesses or Pick the Brain out of a Delirium deck sideboard?
I think I would rather have. I've played Pick the Brain before. I think I would rather have Dispossess, not by a lot, but there's only one matchup I really want Pick the Brain in. If I thought Pick the Brain was more playable in more matchups,
right now, as painful as this is to say, I'd rather have Dispossess. But also, if I was gonna play Pick the Brain, I would just play Transgress instead.
That's true, and then it depends more on your deck and the curve, all kinds of other things like that, I think.
Yeah, I also think that there are metagames where you might rather have Lay Bare the Heart. It kind of just depends. The fact that Aetherworks Marvel is legendary is like kind of annoying for that card.
Yeah, I think I played that card exactly once. Didn't
and then
not really
realized,
thinking that Marvel was legendary, and then that happened to me, and I just took it out of
yeah,
my sideboard and never did that again. Yeah.
yeah. I also had a match where somebody was like, "Lay Baylor," they're like, "Take your marble." I'm like, "Yeah, you can't do that," and they were like, "Why is this in my sideboard?"
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sometimes you just have to learn the hard way. I've
Yeah.
all been there.
Yeah, so that is it for this week's question of the week from one of our patrons. Thank you so much to all of our patrons. If you go to patreon.com/ccmtg, you too can ask a question. We have a thread going right now with a couple more questions, and we'll be answering those over the next couple of weeks. Thank you to all of you. We really do appreciate it. If you want to support the show, there are multiple ways to do it. This is a question I probably get asked once every couple of weeks, so it's not like an every week kind of question, but it's probably, I don't know, every 2 weeks. I'm not a patron. I can't become a patron. How can I support you guys? And if you go to constructivecriticism.com, right on the homepage, there are 3 ways to support us. There's the Patreon page, there's a PayPal donation where it's just one-time donations through PayPal, and there's a swag store. So it's very small margins on swag. We want you guys to get what you want with just us making like less than 1/10 of anything that you spend. But it is appreciated. So if you go to the swag store on constructivecriticism.com, you can get limited time only t-shirts, you can get Constructive Criticism t-shirts, you can get GP Vegas t-shirts, you can get stickers, you can get mugs, and you can get mascot t-shirts. So whether you're Team Obi or Team Austin, those are available for you. Just go to constructivecriticism.com, click on the swag page, and you too can show your Obi pride.
Just not even giving them the other option, are you? I mean, to be fair,
hashtag anti-Austin. Is that a hashtag I can use?
I mean, he always talks about internet bullying him, but that's probably getting close to the actual line.
I don't know that I've ever internet bullied Austin Godels. Not one time.
Never. Not even, by butchering his last name.
To be fair, he bought the shirt.
That's indeed true.
Let's talk about the other way you can support the show. You can do it by going to our sponsor. You can go to Oasis Games. You can check them out at mtgoasis.com. You can get 15% off of your first order by using the code CCMTG at checkout. And you can get 4% off of every order by using the code Would That Be Good. I have really enjoyed shopping Oasis Games the last little while. So for those who don't know something about me, I'm weird. I'll sell all of my standard cards, buy 4 standard decks, sell all of my standard cards, buy 4 standard decks, just all the time. And the willingness that Michael, specifically Michael Fish, that's it. That's the only people I'll sell to. Have dealing with me doing that is very much appreciated. So.
Well, yeah, we try our best, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, Michael's only bought 6 collections of mine in the last, 4 months, so it's not that big of a deal. but they really are a great place to buy cards. I honestly don't lose that much by doing that because I get my winnings from playing my decks, and then I'm kind of done with them and I sell them. It really is a great experience. So they do have a buy list. You can check it out at Oasis Games, slc.com, mtgoasis.com. and oasisccg.com, and we really do appreciate them as a sponsorship. So thank you, Oasis.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to our next segment, which is hashtag always improving. We believe if you are not getting better, you are getting worse. We want to be doing what we can every week to be doing a bit better. Michael, other than you being sick right now, what are you doing to try and improve life and Magic in general?
I mean, talking about getting better, I spend most of my day sleeping, so trying to get better. But I've been playing a lot of Legacy and Modern, trying to figure out just decks I want to play in Las Vegas in a little under a month here. Just trying to make sure that I feel prepared for that. And I always find that if I just do the best I can in preparation, I feel so much better, so much more confident. I stress a lot less when I'm feeling like I've done all that I can to prepare.
So what are you doing? Are you just jamming Moto? I actually saw you at a paper tournament this week.
Yeah, I played a little bit in paper, played a bunch on Magic Online, talked to Matt a bunch, watched him play, just trying to sort of get a feel for what the metagame looks like right now, and then just kind of going from there as far as what I'd like to be playing against. My feeling in Legacy right now is that Grixis Delver is probably public enemy number one, and if you don't feel pretty decent about that matchup, probably gonna have a bad time. So that's mostly what I've been working on.
Okay. Yeah, I think that we're in an interesting time in Magic right now. Michael, you qualified for the RPTQ?
I am, yes.
Okay.
So
So for me, this is kind of a weird time where I have an RPTQ and multiple GPs like back to back to back. And so and PPTQs, right? So I'm like, I actually have to be prepared for 4 formats at once, and I haven't had that problem probably ever in Magic.
yeah, it's super difficult to try to keep on top of that much stuff at the same time.
So for me, right now I'm focusing on specifically Legacy and Limited. But something that happens this week. So right now, this week specifically, I had a really hard time with like my emotions. So for those who don't know, I suffer from bipolar disorder, and sometimes that can be really hard in Magic the Gathering. And there was a young man at Oasis Games during game day who was being pretty vulgar, and I asked him to please stop, and then he responded with a very vulgar comment. And for some reason that really set me off. Like I was upset for like the next 2. I was still upset today. I've been upset for 3 days about it, and that is bad. Like if you could imagine being upset about something that minute for that long, this happens a lot with my disorder, and sometimes it really hurts me in Magic. I made so I took I think I took second at both game days this weekend that I played in, and I don't know that I've ever not won a game day that I tried to win, and it was kind of annoying, like losing to Chris and Casey Bloodworth, 2 of like my best friends and like good teammates, and they both played awesome decks. Casey played the Bant deck that he and I worked on. Chris played a blue-red control deck that was like kind of ramp control with Hedron Archive and Ulamog and Drowner of Hope. Just some sweet decks. But I played badly against both of them. Just made misplays, played terribly, and it's because I let this thing that was outside of the game upset me. And it's a really hard thing to deal with. I've talked before about the PTQ that I lost in the top 8 of, and where I was like upset, and it's hard for me to figure out like what coping mechanisms I can use during Magic. So for my birthday this year, I'm turning 27 on May 30th, and I was kind of saying like, what do I want to do for my birthday? Like, what do I want to do? And I've decided that I'm gonna do 5 to 6 hour stream where I'll stream Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, Pokemon TCG, and then they actually have original StarCraft and Brood War for free online right now, and
that's great.
So I'm gonna stream that, all of those things, and I'm gonna take donations, and all of the donations I'm actually gonna send to a charity that helps people with mental disorders like mine. Just because I think that like your mental health is really important, and I want to, like, what do I want for my birthday? Nothing. Like I'm 27 years old. I don't want anything for my birthday. If I want something, I buy it. Like I'm an adult. Right. So for my birthday instead, come watch the stream. Come hang out with me on my birthday, and then if you have funds, come donate, and we'll send all donations to a charity that helps people with mental disorders. So, and that's kind of I'm also trying to improve myself. Like, how can I be better about this kind of stuff? And that's kind of what I'm focusing on this week, as it's something that I'm struggling with right now. So, hopefully we can get I can get better at it and find coping skills that really work for me in Magic, because I would like to do well at this RPTQ. It's like my first RPTQ since like coming back to Magic, and I'd like to go to Honolulu. So, or it's not Honolulu, it's actually Kyoto.
But I mean, you can still want to go to Honolulu. No one's going to hold that against you.
I also want to go to Honolulu. I mean, those places are close to each other, so I don't know why I said that.
Well, but I mean, it can just be a good general statement.
I want to go to Honolulu. So yeah, let's go into our next segment. So every week on the show, we invite somebody that is one of our patrons of $5 or more per month to do a deck doctor. So what that means is they submit a deck list, we read it, and we talk about it on the show. We want to tell you what we like, what we don't like, kind of just be honest. Like, I think that something that I wish that I had going into, and I probably did do this a little bit with some of the local players, is like ask them like, hey, like, will you evaluate this deck? Like, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And really tuning either my brews or honestly, like, is my list too stock? Is my list not stock enough? Like, where do I go from here? And I think that we want to offer people that while Michael and I are like not the best people in the world to be doing this, we want to still offer opinions and give you some kind of a feedback outlet. So
Absolutely.
just terms of endearment for us right here. So what we have is we have a list that is 1 Botanical Sanctum, 1 Breeding Pool, 1 Flooded Strand, 3 Forest, 1 Township, 1 Ghost Quarter, 1 Hollowed Fountain, 1 Horizon Canopy, 1 Keswick Wolf Run, 4 Misty Rainforest, 1 Plains, 1 Stomping Ground, 1 Temple Garden, 4 Windswept Heath. Okay, that's 9 fetches. Okay. 4 Path to Exile, 4 Birds of Paradise, 4 Noble Hierarch, 1 Selfless Spirit, 3 Scavenging Ooze, 2 Fosali Pride Mage, 3 Voice of Resurgence, 2 Retreat to Cormhelm, 1 Tireless Tracker, 2 Courser of Prefix, 4 Spell Queller, 4 Nether Weller Query, 4 Collected Company. The sideboard is 2 Gideon of the Trials, 2 Negate, 3 Unified Will, 2 Kitchen Finks, 2 Vendilling, or 1 Vendilling Click, 1 Eldritch Evolution, 1 Izzet Staticaster, and 3 Reflector Mage. Michael, what are your thoughts on this deck list?
So I have a couple of thoughts. I've seen a number of these now, and I have, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say concerns, but a couple of thoughts. One thing that stands out to me, I've seen a number of lists playing Sacred Foundry over Stomping Ground as your 1 land for Keswick Wolf Run. And I kind of, I don't know if it looks like maybe you just don't want another white source, but I kind of like that in the sense that I like if you need to produce green-red to activate Keswick Wolf Run, I kind of like not having them both come from the same land.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I want to start with what I love. So, obviously, this deck is a Neither Reliquary, Retreat to Cormhelm deck. But honestly, Michael, have you seen one like this before?
I think this is a relatively stock list these days. What stands out to you?
So the last time I saw it was like when you were playing Modern State, when you took second at Modern States. Like, that's the last time I looked at one of these deck lists. And this deck list is very, very different. Those decks. Oh, no. The Spell Quellers are in the main. What was in the sideboard? Oh, Reflector Mage is in the sideboard.
Yeah, I'm curious about Reflector Mage. I would like to.
For some reason in my head, it registered Spell Queller on the sideboard, and I was like, I think that's wrong. I think you want Spell Queller in the main of this deck. Okay. Tyler's Tracker is an interesting one-up to me. Okay.
Yeah, I'm curious about some of the splits on like Tracker, Selfless, and Courser in a deck that doesn't really have a lot of card selection.
I actually really like Courser in this deck. If you're gonna play red, I wonder if this deck would like Domri Raid.
I feel like you're pushing up against the number of non-creatures you can play in the main deck with the retreats, the paths.
All you're playing is paths and retreats, right? That's it.
And companies, right? I mean, but the thing is that like when you're talking about hits, Birds of Paradise and Noble Hierarch are like technically creatures, but they're pretty bad Collected Company.
Noble Hierarch is a good hit off of Collected Company.
Like, it's okay, but I mean, it depends on the board state, obviously. But Birds of Paradise mostly not a hit.
Birds of Paradise is like close to a non-hit. I'll agree with that.
Yeah, and Noble is okay, but situational, right?
Yeah. One thing is I will agree with Casey on is that I don't know how you don't play a Sejiri Step in this deck, at least as a one-of.
Yeah, I wonder if I'm curious about the main deck Ghost Quarter. I feel like this deck is already trying to push its mana a little bit, and I wonder if I wouldn't be happier with that in the sideboard
Yeah.
and trying to limit the number of colorless lands given how many, like, right, we have Pride Mage at green white, we have Voice at green white, we have Courser at green green, Knight at green white, Queller at blue white. Like I'm a little ambivalent about 3 colorless lands. Although I know that is the standard number these days.
I'm not making fun of you, but I have to tell you, we got an email that from a listener that said you should nickname Michael Mr. Ambivalent because you say it every episode.
That's probably true, but I'm ambivalent about that nickname.
I have a few thoughts to wrap this up on things. So like, first of all, I actually do like this deck. I think that people are usually underprepared for this deck. It gets a decent number of 5-0s for the number of people that actually play it on Moto. But
definitely.
I do have some thoughts. The list that I've seen that I really like run Blessed Alliance out of the sideboard. What do you think is the reason that they do that?
I would assume it's largely for Death Shadow style matchups.
And do you think any of the trials just does a better job of that? Because actually, I think that's actually what they switched up.
That might be true. I have never been a huge fan of Unified Will. If there was one card,
I think that's pretty common among those deck lists, though.
It is common. I have been really underwhelmed with that almost every time I've ever played it. Mostly because I feel like you end up using a lot of sideboard slots because the fact that you're playing negates as well basically says that in a lot of the control matchups it can be too hard to really stick creatures, I think, for Unified Will to be great. Right? So like if we're looking at just how we use our sideboard slots, if we have to play 5 counter spells but we're probably never boarding them all in at the same time, that makes me wonder if that doesn't maybe indicate just some issues with Unified Will.
So I actually have a thought on the sideboard specifically that I would like your thoughts on. I actually don't think you have nearly enough affinity interaction in your deck.
That might be true. I mean, Pride Mage does a little bit, but this deck in general does not look great against affinity.
Yeah. So like if you were going to take this to a GP, I definitely would have more affinity cards in my deck.
I agree with that. It's a little bit awkward because like you have to again be careful about sideboarding in a bunch of non-creatures.
Well,
but I think that I'm not even, so you're boarding in Staticaster against affinity. I'm 100% sure of that.
Yes.
And
but,
then
like, are cards like Stony Silence not good enough that you might consider them like okay in your
well, it makes me think that like maybe if you work on the split of counter spells in the sideboard, you might be able to find a couple of slots for something like Stony Silence specifically.
That's the thing that I would go for. Is I would want to find room for a couple of Stony Silence. I might cut a counter spell and an Eldritch Evolution and just play 2 of them. But like if I'm going to a GP, which is so he says credits to Kevin Chu. I've been following as he sees this archetype. If you compare it to recent empty lists, you have no Vizier of the
Menagerie. It's no Vizier of the Menagerie, and then there's no Lotus Cobra. I've not seen Lotus Cobra. Yeah, I've not seen Lotus Cobra commonly, but I've seen a bunch of people playing. I've seen a bunch of people playing Vizier, and it's an interesting one. I'm not entirely convinced that's the kind of card I want in this deck. I feel like in the matchups where you're allowed to develop your mana, like this deck has to be good in mid-range mirrors, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the whole point of playing Collected Company and Knight of the Reliquary and Tireless Trackers. And
looking at this main deck, like again, like as we're going over, I actually really do like the main deck. I might do what Michael said. I might cut a Ghost Quarter for a Sejiri Step in the main deck, and then I would just find room for a couple of affinity cards on the sideboard. And I actually think this is a great choice. I think that like right now people aren't prepared for it, and you have like a really solid game plan against a lot of decks.
Yeah, I think in any of the non-big mana decks, I feel like you have to at least have a lot of game in those matchups.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree. So our next segment on the show is we give some magic cards. So I don't want to. I want to be clear that I don't know that this card has won before, and it's probably deserved a lot of times.
It's probably been close a lot.
It has,
right?
But so I kind of said earlier in the show, if I'm wrong about something, I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong, like more than willing. So we have Glimmer of Genius winning card of the week this week. We're gonna give that to Colton Stark. So Colton, if you just shoot me a message on Facebook, we'll get that sent out to you as soon as possible. I'm a little bit behind on card of the week, just to be honest with people who have won it recently. I said on the show a few weeks ago that the Patreon actually paid one of my bills. So as the next Patreon comes in, we'll be sending out all those cards that we're behind on. But yeah, Glimmer of Genius.
It's funny. I did not think this card was going to be very good when it was spoiled. It looked slow.
Were you ambivalent about it?
I mean, probably.
No,
it's a really powerful effect. I just thought it might be.
I did think that Scry 2, Draw 2 at instant speed was good enough, right? I was like, that's good enough. That card sees play, that's fine. But it has been in so many archetypes.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's like it plays even better than it looks, and it is really good friends with Torrential Gearhulk. I mean, that's maybe what I missed, like how good that card really is with Torrential Gearhulk. Getting to scry and then draw, like it just helps you find gas in the late game so much better than like an inspiration style effect.
3 of our top 5 decks this week are all Glimmer of Genius decks.
Yeah, and it's kind of low key, right? It doesn't.
That's what they are, though, right? Like you can say that they're whatever they are, but like they are all in fact Glimmer of Genius decks. And so last week on the podcast, I was like, I really don't like Glimmer of Genius and Marvel. That's still true. My deck list still doesn't have Glimmer of Genius, but after playtesting, I actually understand why people are playing Glimmer of Genius and Marvel.
Definitely, I think when you look at some of the lists now that are sort of a hybrid between the Chandra lists and the Glimmer lists from the Pro Tour, where they're playing some of both, it ends up feeling kind of less heavy-handed in both directions, right? Like you're probably better against discard and counter magic, and you can play a little more of a flash game while still increasing your threat density by playing some number of Chandras, with it being entirely possible the correct number is not 4.
Yeah, a lot of them. There were looking over deck lists this week. There were Temur Marvel decks that are just like 2 Glimmers, and that's fine. But like they still actively made that choice of like splitting in some way.
Definitely. I kind of like that actually, because if I think about where I'm most excited about Glimmer, it's about decks that are like trying to disrupt you in some way. And I think Glimmer is just the kind of card that, I mean, it's distinctly not Aetherworks Marvel, but it is like, it's a threat that forces you to respond to it. Like you're not going to win a game in which you just let your opponent cast a bunch of Glimmer of Geniuses.
I mean,
right?
When you're playing against blue control decks, you actively jam spells on their Glimmer turns, right? Like you're like, well, I'm going to jam this spell so that they either have to counter it or Glimmer. Like you have to make them make the choice, right? And like that says something. That's early in the game too, right? Like that's completely different than like you can either do this or Sphinx of Revelation or pull from Nora. That's like this card is so good that I'm going to jam into your counter spells.
Right. I remember figuring that out for the first time with like the red-green Marvel deck, that you would actually sandbag spells sometimes to just like play on like, you would like not play a spell on 3 to play it on like 4, 5, and 6, with the idea being that the way to beat them was to never allow them to resolve a Glimmer of Genius.
Yep. 100%.
It's kind of shocking, like how far behind you feel when your opponent resolves one. I mean, I'm sure it's not always as devastating as as you imagine it to be, but it is a really powerful card.
Yeah, it really, really is. So, so Colton, shoot us a message and we'll get this sent to you as soon as possible. So, let's move on to our power rankings. Every week on the show, we give you a breakdown of like what are the decks that are doing well in a given format. We are doing standard again this week. I did a poll. I asked people, do they want SCG results or not, including this instead of just the GPs. It was overwhelmingly include SCG results. So we have 6 decks because one of the decks was 1 point off, and because It was one point up of the deck that only did well at the SCG events. So we have coming in at number 6, we have green black constrictor decks. So these decks, none of them look the same at all, but they all are constrictor decks.
Absolutely. I watched a little of coverage where Sean McLaren was playing, and I was really impressed. His deck seemed really cohesive, but a little bit unusual, and it really made me think that like that is probably at least an okay choice going forward.
Yeah, I think that green black is just full of a lot of really good cards. I think that he has a really good Mardu matchup. I think that watching him play, he had a really good zombies matchup. It looked like.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. It didn't seem like it should necessarily be great, but he did.
Well, he has Kalitas in the main deck, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, he's playing 1, right? He just
felt like he was getting delirium pretty easily, though.
Yeah, no, I would say his deck was intelligently constructed, and he had plans, right? You could tell that like he didn't just like, this isn't just green black cards I own. This is like, okay, so in this matchup I'm trying to do this, and in this matchup I'm trying to do this.
So Matt Kling and I were like working on green black X decks like at the beginning of this format, right? And we were like, well, it's really hard to get instant into our graveyard. Maybe we should be playing 2 grapples. And instead, Sean is like, no, I'm just going to play Descender's Deliverance and just cycle it for Delirium.
Yeah, I think that's really nice. That's one that I have tried occasionally, but like it's about having the right mix of cards that require Delirium and don't require Delirium, right? I mean, you want to be paid off for doing this, but you don't want your deck to be completely dysfunctional in games that you don't get it for a turn or 2.
Yeah, well, I did some playtesting against Matt with his list specifically, where Matt was playing it, and it seemed like it got Delirium pretty consistently comparatively to other constrictor decks specifically. And this is a constrictor deck, which is that's impressive.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that this one is like it's interesting, but if you like green black, I think this exact 75 is where I would start, and then you can go from there. But if there's one thing I would start with, it would be this.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything there. So.
Yeah, it was really impressive. It is a deck that, despite playing some interesting cards, like you don't think of Descender's Deliverance as being particularly powerful, but it's a deck where like cycling it is pretty powerful.
I wonder if I sent the wrong list, because the list on the screen is definitely not correct. Oh no, I'm just wrong. Okay. Doesn't this have Fatal Push in the main?
I don't. It does. It has 3 of them. Yeah. Yeah, they are in there.
Oh, okay. They're just hidden under the forest. Okay.
Yeah, but back to playing. One of the things that I also think is underrated in this deck is by playing more Planeswalkers, you make it much more likely that your first Grim Flayer hit turns on Delirium, and then because you have traverses, like you can play fewer copies of Verdurous Gearhulk and still be good at finding it when you actually want it without flooding out on them. And I just think that like
same thing is true of like Kalitas, which we kind of talked about.
Absolutely. I just think this deck is like surprisingly elegant for a deck that you think of as being like kind of the, you know, the dumb curve out deck.
I also think that like this deck was like in playtesting has been a surprisingly good Nissa deck. And Nissa was just like one of the underrated and then suddenly one of the best cards in Standard not that long ago. And this deck is a Nissa deck. Like, it is very good at being a Nissa deck. Whether it's putting counters on your Grim Player to get in an attack early, whether it's putting counters on your Walking Ballista, or whether you have a Winding Constrictor in play and that's actually just the best card in your deck, it just does so many things really well.
Yeah, I like that this deck is very flexible. Like, if you look at the sideboard, you can kind of go... You can probably remove some of the higher end stuff in some of the matchups, but you can also become really like a green-black control deck in the boarded games, and I think that's really appealing. Like it has a lot of play.
Up next, we have Temur Tower coming in with 14 points. Okay, so this can't be better than Jeskai or Blue Red, right? Like it just can't be.
I actually think one of the things I do like about this deck is, again, I really like getting to play Dissenter's Deliverance.
Okay.
I think that card is just like in decks where you are not always about spending all your mana every turn.
Sure.
It's a surprisingly powerful effect, and it makes your Mardu matchup better without probably destroying any of your other ones. So I think that's sort of an underrated effect, and I also like that, again, it changes how Marvel has to play. They can't, like, if you cycle a Dissenter's Deliverance and then play a Dynavolt Tower, can they really play a Marvel without 6 energy? I think that kind of stuff, just like the knowledge that it's in your 75 changes how some of the matchups play. But I agree with you in the sense that I've always found this deck.
I actually think this deck has a really good Marvel matchup. I think it's actually one of the reasons to play it. My problem is that so does blue-red control splashing white or without splashing white. Like, why are you playing this over that?
Yeah, it's hard to say. This is not my favorite deck, but it's one that's had, on and off reasonable levels of success. So despite not spending a lot of time playing with it,
It didn't get any. Let's be clear. All of its points came from the SCG.
So what were the SCG finishes for it?
I would have to pull that up. Why would you ask me that on the podcast? I mean, having it pulled up. No, I'm just kidding. I can tell you. So it had a 4-point finish, a 1-point finish, a 4-point finish, and a 4-point finish, or a 5-point and a 4. So 2 4s, a 5, and a 1.
Okay, so I mean it's not bad, but I think my impression looking at the SCG lists in particular was people mostly played Marvel, or else they just played what they wanted to play. And I think that if you expect a lot of Marvel, this deck is probably at least an okay choice.
Yep.
Right? I mean, that matchup has to be at least fine.
Coming up next, we have Mono Black Mardu, as the screen will say. And this deck plays a bunch of swamps and a bunch of creatures. So Mono Black Zombies here.
It's the same list as before, basically, right?
Except that it's taking Zvi Mauschwitz advice and it's playing 4 Dispossess.
Sure. I mean, if that's what you decide you like, that
I don't think that's correct. I actually don't hate a 2/2 split of those cards. Like, I actually think that's reasonable.
The first Dispossess is very good, but I agree it's kind of awkward to decide in 4 of them. You start getting into the territory where, like, you can actually... If you draw a
second one, you lose.
It's certainly not a good thing, right? I mean, you have some...
I'm sorry. If you draw a second one, you mulligan. I apologize.
Right. But, that's a real cost. 4 does feel a little bit heavy-handed there. But, again, I think this deck is, like, it's good for the Pro Tour. It's probably still good.
A lot of debate between whether this deck or the black-white version is better. What are your thoughts right now?
There are a lot of things I like about black-white, but I am scared of playing tap lands in decks like this.
Sure. So honestly, the points I did include both black-white and mono-black in these point breakdowns. So there's no separation here. The list that on the screen is mono black because I think I took a top 8 list. I don't know. Like, here's the thing: is this deck did not do well at the GPs. It did top 8 both GPs, so that's well enough. But overall, comparatively, it actually just didn't do that well.
Yeah, so the main thing that scares me about mono black, so I think you're better in the matchups where just like playing guys is good enough. But I'm not sure that against the flame color builds of Marvel that's necessarily true.
Sure.
And against the blue-red control decks, I think like that's where Dispossess over Transgress really hurts you, and that's where losing access to Gideon in the board really hurts you. So
yeah, I also think that's an important note, right? Like, how good is Gideon in this world of Marvel, right? It's pretty good when you're a deck like this.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's always great versus Marvel, but it's definitely always great versus Control.
I think it's great versus both. As somebody who like
Sure.
plays a lot of both of those decks, I pretty much am like pretty upset when they have a Gideon.
Sure. No, I mean it makes sense. No, Gideon is just powerful. And I think when you look at the power level of the black-white deck, especially in the boarded games, I think the deck,
Well, its
despite
sideboard
being
is
a little
obviously better.
more
You get an extra color, right? Like that's just
right. Yeah, but I mean I think you see that like in the pre-board games, I think I like the mono black version better. But
yeah.
there's a real cost in the post-board games, especially in the Control matchups.
Coming in, dropping a spot this week, going down to number 3 is Vehicles. The deck is it's got good cards. Like it's just going to be a top 5 deck this format. That's fine.
Yeah,
like
it's I mean we've played against it before.
The list on the screen actually did something interesting though. It played Transgress and Anguished Unmaking, adopting some of the tech from the Zombies deck, and I actually really like this tech.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a little unsure whether I want to be this mid-rangey with Mardu. I'm kind of interested in trying something a little bit lower to the ground.
I mean,
but
its main deck is very aggressive, and then it just has answers in its board.
Yeah, just I mean like the 24 lands, 2 Caravans, 2 Avacens. I wonder how good Avacyn really is in this format.
Oh, I mean, for me, I'm still cut to ribbons, Glorybringer in this deck. Like that's what I would be doing still.
Yeah, I've messed around with it.
Are we losing me or are we losing Michael? All right. So let's go on to the next deck while we're working on Michael. So the next deck is Blue-Red Control. This deck, there are 2 versions of the deck. There's versions playing white for Nahiri and Cast Out, and there are versions not playing white. Overall, I think that the deck is pretty good. Like the sideboards for the Blue-Red versions are pretty weird. Playing things like Thing in the Ice and Essence scattered out of the board, whereas the white versions get more things. I do think that Biforce is an interesting change. You actually just don't get that much value out of your you don't get that much value out of your man, it is hard doing a podcast alone, guys. Out of your XX red spell that lets you get 2/2s. It's just not as good as Biforce in this deck, and it was something that I expected to kind of happen, and it's interesting to see that coming to fruition. I do think that the blue-red deck does have better mana, and also just has better Harness Lightnings, which is important, because I think that Harness Lightning is, if not the best card, one of the best cards in the entire set, in the entire format for just killing creatures dead. Michael, what are your thoughts on blue-red?
All right, I believe I am back here.
You sure are. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yep. Lagging a little bit, but I should be good here. I like blue-red pretty well in this format. I think the biggest issue with it is just trying to get the mix of removal spells correct.
Yeah.
Like in any given week, you could want more or less Magma Sprays compared to Sweltering Suns, compared to hard counters. Like it just feels like, despite the fact that this deck is going to look basically it's going to look very, very similar week to week, I think you really get paid off for the small decisions.
Yeah, one of the things that I will say is there was a deck at the Pro Tour that basically just splashed white for Cast Out. And I think that person was going in the right direction. I think it makes it easier for your removal/counter suite and those decisions, and that's the direction I would go. And those are actually the decks that I would be playing going forward in the format.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought. It's always just a question of like, what is your trade-off mana-wise, right?
I think it makes your Harness Lightnings a little bit worse, and the rest of it is free almost, at least in my
interesting. Yeah, or close to it, right? I mean, I could definitely see that. It's nice to get more cycling cards in a deck like this. I think those are really helpful, and it's really nice to have just a less conditional answer. Like the main thing I've noticed in playing of like specifically this style of blue-red deck is that occasionally you will just draw the wrong half in pre-board games. Like you really don't want to see a bunch of Magma Sprays against Marvel, and you really don't want to see a bunch of disallows against Mardu, right?
Yep.
Like
let's
yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. One thing that I will say for this deck before we move on is that Pull for Tomorrow feels as fun as it looks like it is. Man, I miss doing that.
Yeah, it's really it's like super demoralizing when you're like, okay, we're playing a game, and they start tapping a bunch of mana, and you're like, okay, well, it's a Gear Hulk, so that's bad for me. And then you're like, oh wait, no, they actually just drew 6 cards. I just lose.
Yeah, they're like, you're in this game, and like you're like, oh man, this Gear Hulk's gonna be hard to beat, but at least I like have this removal spell. And they're like, yeah, I'm gonna pull from tomorrow, and you're like, yeah, I can't.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's awkward. Yeah, I've had that happen to me a couple of times, and
yeah,
it feels about as good as it sounds like it would feel.
Well, let's move on to our obvious number one deck.
So, moving on.
Yeah.
By a lot.
Yeah, it's by, I think it's by 40 more points than it was last week. And that is Temur Marvel, comes in with 107 points. I did look at previous show notes. This is actually not close to the level that Green-White was ahead of other decks when Green-White was dominant. It's like Green-White would have like 232 points on Mega Rankings weeks, and other decks would have like 12 points. So like, let's be clear. There were months where Green-White was all but one of the top 8 multiple weeks in a row.
Yeah.
This deck is not close to that. I am biased here. So I think that this is secretly one of the best standard formats ever, and people are now used to complaining to get what they want, to not have to attack decks that they don't like. And I actually don't. I think Marvel's super beatable. Like, it's just super easy to beat. And having it be one of the best decks to keep vehicles in check is actually a good thing. Because I would hate being in a format that was vehicles, which is what the format would be if Marvel didn't exist. Like, vehicles could easily adapt to zombies. Like, it wouldn't even be hard.
I mostly agree with that too. I think that I think that these lists, like the one that's on the screen right now, show kind of an interesting evolution in where people are going with this deck. This is, mostly a pretty straight hybrid of the 2 successful lists from the Pro Tour. Right, this one is playing 2 Chandras and 4 Glimmers, and then they're playing a Nissa's Renewal, but they're also playing some Censors. And I feel like you just end up in a pretty good space with the mix of...
It's just a control deck that's playing Marvel, right? Like, that's all it is.
Yeah, and I like that. I actually like the move away from Dissenter's Deliverance, because I think that Dissenter's Deliverance is the kind of card that your opponent has to play around whether you have it or not. Like, it really limits how much in a pre-board game you just want to jam Marvel with less than 6 energy. Yeah. But if you're expecting less vehicles, I don't know that it's a card you actually want in your main deck.
And this is the deck of the week, so we're gonna go deep on this one. So every week on the show, we pick one of the decks that we're talking about. We're actually just gonna dive deep on it. And this week it is Marvel. So I want to talk about key cards really quick. Obviously the namesake of the deck, Marvel being one of those key cards. I saw a really funny thing. Somebody adjusted on Twitter. They adjusted the economy of energy. Right? It was really funny. It was like 1 energy does blah blah blah, 2 energy does blah blah blah, 3 energy like draws, like gets a Thopter, 4 energy like draws a card or something, and then it was like 6 energy cast Ulamog. Yeah. And it was like it was a pretty funny meme. I laughed at it. But honestly, I actually don't think that that's the point of this deck. Like, those games happen, and it's important to note that those games happen, and you have to be prepared for those games. There were multiple times in testing this week where people were like, "I'm going to do Senator's Deliverance your Woodweaver's puzzle knot right now, like before you untap," and that was the right play, and they won games because of that. I think that's important to note. Like people are like, "You can't stop it." Like they just play a Woodweaver's, crack it, and then play the thing. It's like, well, actually, if you just kill the Woodweavers, like you actually just stop them. And what Marvel is actually trying to do is just play Marvel, get value out of Marvel. There are games where it needs to hit Chandra or Ulamog or it busts, but a lot of the games it will just activate Marvel for value.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that like once you actually have an active Aetherworks Marvel, you have so many cards in the deck that essentially will let you run back activations. Like maybe not every single turn, but very nearly every single turn, and then Ulamog mostly just ends the game.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So it's
like
more about
draw 3 cards until you hit Ulamog, right?
yeah. It's often more about inevitability than it is about explosiveness.
Exactly. And there are
Right.
the games where it's like that first one does hit Ulamog, they kill 2 of your lands, and you can't win, right? But there was a deck building cost that they had to.
Well,
had,
and a lot of the
Right.
lists are only on 3 Ulamogs, right? I mean, I think
yes.
there's a reason. The goal is not to build the all-in Marvels from PT Kaladesh. The goal is to build a deck
A control
that
deck.
yeah, it gains life, it makes blockers. In some matchups, you know, Rogue Refiner and Whirler Virtuoso are real clocks all on their own. And then Marvel creates overwhelming board states that your opponents can't recover from.
Yeah, so as far as matchups go, I would say that this deck's good matchups are Mardu Vehicles are pretty good for you. Green-Black is pretty good for you, although Sean McLaren said he beat 6 Zombies decks day 1 of the G.
Or six Marvel decks, rather.
6 Marvel decks. I did do some testing against that. Sean McLaren is a master. I actually don't think that good matchup's good for him. He's just Sean McLaren.
Well, there's a lot to be said for that in basically every format ever, too,
It's
right?
true.
Like,
It's true.
if you're just better than your opponents at the game,
Yeah.
matchups start to swing in your favor. If all your sequencing is perfect, all your mulligans are perfect, right?
Yep. I think mono black zombies is a good matchup. So I would say green black, mono black zombies, and Mardu are good for you. But I would say that black white zombies, Temur Tower, and blue control decks are not in your favor. Now, I do believe that if you're a good, just like any deck, if you're a good Temur Marvel player, you can beat blue control. You can beat black white zombies. I think Temur Tower is a terrible matchup for you. Like, I actually just think it's bad.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Like one of the ways you can win a lot of the control matchups is forcing them to expend resources dealing with your Whirler Virtuosos and Rogue Refiners.
Yeah.
But if they have a card that is a lot less powerful.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, once they just have a card that deals with those on its own and they don't really have to worry about it, it kind of takes that advantage away from you, which is pretty important.
Definitely.
Yeah. The chat loves your robot voice, Michael. I think that what's important here is like half of the decks in this top 6 are good matchups and half of them are bad matchups. It's not like this deck is unbeatable, but what is true it is the best deck, right? I think this is attuned to like when Siege Rhino was the best card in Standard. Like that's kind of what it reminds me of.
I can get on board with that. I think a lot of it is like your good matchups are better than your bad matchups are bad.
That's true. Like your good matchups are like
very good, right?
But your bad matchups are like 60-40.
Right. There's sort of a basement on how bad any matchup can be when some percentage of the time you just cast Ulamog on turn 4 on the play.
Right. Which is kind of why it reminds me of Siege Rhino, right? It's like, how bad can your matchups be when you just like go, Guy, Siege Rhino, Siege Rhino? It's like, it turns out not that bad. It kind of reminds me of that.
I can see that to some extent. Like it obviously doesn't play like Abzan, but in the sense that just you're playing better cards, right? Like your basement is pretty low, but your ceiling is extremely high.
I also and Attune with Ether probably could have been the card of the week multiple times. It might have already won it once, but like Attune with Ether is also just turned out to be how good they should make Lay of the Lands is probably lower than this Lay of the Land. It is probably too powerful. Being basically an Evolving Wilds that like advances your game plan is a little bit too good. And it just lets you cheat on lands in a kind of an inappropriate way.
Yeah, it's interesting in this deck. Like, I'm not convinced that Attune with Aether is really great in any other deck. Like, even the green-black energy decks, it feels a little suspect sometimes. But it is really powerful when it like allows you to routinely have 6 energy on turn 4.
Yep.
Right. That's basically
your best draws are always your Attune draws, right? Like, if you have Attune, 2 lands, and Marvel and like any other spells in your deck, it's usually like an auto keep. And that's important. So that is it for deck
absolutely. And I think the combination of mana, the combination of mana fixing that stuff.
Yep. So that is it for Deck of the Week this week, and we will be right back after this short break.
Does that look better?
Like I can literally see you blinking. So
okay,
awesome.
Well,
all right, we are back. Sorry about that. We just wanted to all the robot comments in chat. We wanted to get this fixed. So let's move on. So that's Deck of the Week this week. And we are excited to move on to our training ground. So every week on the show, we want to talk about something that's going to make you better at Magic or life in general. This week, we want to talk about. So I actually didn't preface it the way because I didn't want Mason, who's our technical producer, to like tell people what the podcast was actually about. I wanted it to be a little bit of a surprise. So for those who are following, this week is about leveling up. But we actually want to talk about whether or not leveling up actually exists. Is it a real thing? Do you actually gain experience points, get levels, gain feats, and new skills, or is that a thing that exists in real life and in Magic the Gathering? And that's what we want to talk about. So let's start with this. So back in the day, I did do podcasts where we actually talked about this. I did a podcast where we actually talked about this one. And there was a podcast that we did. One of my favorite podcasts from BrainTap was called Gage Ate the Red Mushroom. So the idea is like you get this power up, right? And then all of a sudden you're like way better than you were before, right? And a lot of people, they want this in Magic the Gathering, right? They want this thing that you tell them that makes them a better Magic player instantly. Because it's a shortcut, right? Like
sure.
it's not actually the same as an RPG, right? Like they don't want an RPG level up where they have to get experience points. They want the red mushroom.
Right.
Right? They want the fire flower. And
yeah, I mean,
go
it
ahead.
makes sense. It makes sense why that's appealing, right? Like the idea that like things will be going okay for you, and then suddenly they'll just be like, bang, okay, well, I was okay before, and now I'm great.
Right. Let's be clear. If like I could get a star that would make me invincible for some number of rounds, I would take it every time. But unfortunately, that is not how Magic works. Magic is actually a little bit closer to like a really grindy RPG. There are definitely moments where you learn something and you kind of take that with you for a long time.
I would say more than you learning something in like the, oh well, I was bad before and now I'm good. It's like something that you already knew kind of finally clicks, right? Like sometimes you
Sure.
have a moment where maybe you finally understand like something about mulliganing or gameplay, or something someone does really speaks to you in a way, like playing against someone, you really learn something from playing against them. But I don't think that you can ever just like, I don't think you can ever just like dramatically improve in 10 minutes.
So, Michael, for those who did come to this episode to hear level up moments, are there moments where you felt like you've leveled up?
I mean, there are moments where I felt like I mean, I guess I remember like sometimes you just feel like you finally understand something, like something with mulliganing. But I think the thing is, it's more like you look away for a minute or you stop focusing on something, but you continue to work and get better. And then you realize, oh, I'm like a lot better at this than I was a month ago. And maybe it sort of feels like that. But I don't think there's ever been a moment where I just like, well, I sucked at this before and now I'm good at it.
Yeah, I think that there are a few moments that are like click moments for me, but not like level ups. Like this clicked. Like I understand something I didn't understand before. But like what and it does make a like some amount of change in your game. So one of them was in the Callblade era where I was playing a Callblade Mirror and somebody cast a Squadron Hawk, activated their Jace, and then cast another Squadron Hawk, and I was like, and then got two Squadron Hawks out of their deck, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, like this is so much better than how I've been playing this.
I've been doing this so wrong the whole time. And it's like, looking back on it, it was super obvious. It's not like I couldn't have figured that out on my own. It was just a moment of like, oh, well, now I know that, like, but it helped me in Legacy, right? Like, now I understand how Brainstorm works.
Right. So, I mean, I think that maybe that's more true. Like, you can take some sort of experience in a game and then it makes other things click for you. Like a more broad concept suddenly makes sense, where like you didn't understand maybe why Brainstorm was great. And then seeing someone like do the like really like in your face version with like, hey, look, I'm going to put these Squadron Hawks back and then I'm going to get them both out of my deck again.
Yeah. Like the whole 2-mana draw 5 is like a really powerful ability.
Right. But sometimes it takes it like being, it has to like kind of slap you in the face for you to figure out exactly what's happening and why this is so powerful.
Here's the thing to think about, right? I'm playing a Callblade Mirror. I have the same cards in my deck. I wasn't doing that. I went from like feeling like I was pretty good to like, oh, I have no chance to win this game. I didn't do that last turn. He now has like 6 more cards than me. I don't know how I could possibly win.
Right. And I guess like Brainstorm is kind of the same way, right? It's like basically, well, frequently you have cards in your hand that, I mean, they're technically cards. They're just not actually going to do anything in the game you're playing.
Yeah.
Right.
The other moment that I had, I've told this story on the podcast probably like 7 times by now. It's just the moment where Alex and I are playing it at the first Utah Open, the last Utah Open. It's not even called Utah Open anymore. It's called Magic Open. We draw round 1, and I think we both win. So we're both 4-0-1. And I walked up to him and I was like, all right, we both got 1 more to go or something. And he was like, no, I've got 4 more to go. Like, I came here to win this thing. And, like, it was more than that, actually. I think we also might have both had a loss at this point. Anyway, like, he was like, no, I've got X number to go, including the top 8. And I was like, well, no, I meant you have that till top 8. He's like, I didn't come here to top 8. And it was a moment that's, like, obvious. Like, obviously, why did I come to this Magic tournament? It was obviously to win it. But,
right,
like,
but sort of how am I measuring myself? And
for some reason in my head, I put the measurement at top 8. Why did I do that? That's stupid. I don't know why I did that. But, like, it was him saying it so matter-of-factly. It was like, what do you mean I've got 1 more to go? One more what? What do I have 1 more of? And like, to me, it was like we were having 2 different conversations. And it has legitimately made me win more Magic tournaments. Like, legitimately, I have won more Magic tournaments because of that conversation. I have won way more matches of Magic because of that conversation. People act like your mental state doesn't matter. The fact is that you lose a lot of top 8s because you're happy you're in top 8.
yeah, I think it's real easy to sort of, it happens when you're playing players who you know are better than you as well. Like, you just, as your deck doesn't just give you nut draws or whatever, you're kind of like, you're just accepting that you're going to lose before it's even happening, right? I mean, I think we've all had that experience, and it's something that when it finally clicks for you that, like, no one is entitled to, you know, someone can be better than you, but, like, they still have to actually beat you, and it's a lot easier if you just roll over for them.
And then the last level up moment is actually in a very similar vein. I talked about this, I think, like, in the last 2 months. It's just realizing that I make poor decisions when I'm up a game. Like, it is, I don't know why I do it. And I'll find myself, like, about to make a play and be like, why am I doing this? Why did I just think in my head, I'm up a game, this is fine? That is not a reason to make a play. It's
Right.
not a reason to make a decision. Why did I do that? And, like, that has brought, like, last year, I think I won 66% of matches, and I'm close to winning 80% of matches this year. And, like, it is because I realized I was doing that.
Yeah, just playing badly in game 2, especially if you win game 1.
It's so, like, why would you choose to do that?
Right. Like the goal is just to make the best play, and how the match is going isn't really relevant to that.
Oh, just not at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of that kind of stuff, I wouldn't say any of the, like, they're not leveling up.
Right?
You didn't necessarily get better at playing Magic. It's more like, I think you have moments where you kind of see things more clearly. Like, you're introspective in a way that helps you get out of your own way.
Sure.
Right? Like, you're not getting into the top 8 and then just being like, oh, well, you know, I'm gonna keep my 1-lander because I already top 8'd, it's fine. Right? Or in game 2, I'm gonna take really aggressive loose lines because, hey, I won a game. This one's kind of a free roll.
Yeah, and the thing is like, it happens so quickly, right? Like, that one specifically is like, I'll do that, but, like, well, I'm up a game, I can afford to, like, take a risk and keep this hand. It's like, no, you're not more likely to win the next game just because you won game 1. Like, you just can't make that. You can't make that justification, and that's hard. It's like, it's hard to realize that. I've literally had players ask me, like, well, what's the game count in this mulligan decision? I'm like, well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter literally at all.
The only way that could matter is if you had to win a game quickly. That would be about the only time.
Sure.
But ultimately, that comes down to, right, like, what is your goal to win the match? So
I want to talk about a theory that I have, and this has come up a lot at work. So for those who don't know, I got a new job in January. I'm working in product, so I work for a company called OC Tanner, and I work in their IT department, working on new apps, and I work in their labs department specifically. So I actually work on new apps, new innovations for the company, and so my job is to come up and talk about product and, like, make decisions on, like, what the product does and how it works and stuff like that. And it's a hard job. It's a fun job. It's a hard job, But something that's come up a lot is the learning curve about life, about things like that. And I am very lucky that I play Magic the Gathering because I believe in the theory, and it's the magical hill theory. This is a hill that exists, right? Where you can always see the top of the hill until you get there. So here's my theory. So Magic and many things in life, you are on a hill. And you can see the top of the hill, but once you get to the top, you realize there's a lot further to go. You can look back and see the things that you've done and the things that you've learned, but there's always another top. I actually believe this exists. And here's why I believe it exists. I believe you don't realize how bad you were at something until you become better at it, right? Like, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I can see that a lot. Like, a lot of the time, like with I think the Squadron Hawk thing is a really good example, right? Like, if you just never understood what the better play was, then you were doing it fine, right? You're still winning a decent amount of your matches. You're still playing the best you can.
I'm winning a lot of matches. I won a lot of matches.
Right, but then sort of as it happens, you're just like, oh man, I'm not even close to as good as I thought I was. I missed, some really dumb interaction.
And here's the thing that I think that a lot of people is they get to the top of this hill and they're like, I'm at the top. Let's go to the Pro Tour. We're good. Everything's good. And then they start to lose.
Well, I mean, or you get to a Pro Tour and then you're like, oh man, these people are like a lot better than me again.
Right. Maybe that's when you start to lose, right? But you're like, why am I losing? I'm at the top of the hill. And then you like look back at the things you learned, and then you like turn your head and you look up and you're like, holy crap, that hill is I'm not at the top. I'm at there was another hill in the distance, and I'm at the plateau of this, like I'm at the level playing field of this part of the hill. There's another hill I need to go climb. And I think it's real. In my job today, there have been many times where I climbed a hill, and then somebody asks me a question, and I don't know the answer. I don't even know what they're asking. Like, they'll ask me a question. I'm like, not only do I want to answer your question, but I don't even know what your question is. I actually don't know what you are saying right now. Can you explain your question to me so that I can figure out how I could possibly find an answer to your question? This is my job, by the way. This is what I do for a living. And
right.
And when I've talked to my boss about it, I'm like, this is good. Like, because it gives me opportunities to learn. And I can compare it to Magic pretty easily, right? You don't actually know what you don't know until you don't know that you don't know something. And that sounds really stupid when you say it out loud. But, like, the fact is you don't. You have no idea, right? Like, I didn't even think that until that Squadron Hawk play is made, I'm like sitting there and I'm like, yeah, draw 3 cards, put 2 of my worst cards back. I love these Squadron Hawks. And then like somebody puts 2 Squadron Hawks back in front of my face, and I'm like, holy crap. It seems so obvious now that you've done it, but like, how did I not think of that?
Right. And I think a lot of that is kind of the same thing, right? Like you whatever your goal is, right? You start playing a game store or whatever, and right, your goal is I'm going to win FNM. And you're like, oh, well, I'm bad now, but I can get better and then I'll win FNM. And then you win an FNM. And you're like, oh, well, maybe I should play a PPTQ. And you go and you play, and these players are like much better than what you were playing against before. And you just keep having these experiences, right? Of like, oh, well, now I'm going to go to a Grand Prix. And as you actually play again, you maybe get crushed a couple of times, and then you make a deeper run, and again you run into a couple of players where again you're like, oh man, they are so much better at this game than I am. And it's kind of a never-ending experience, right? Like,
yeah.
Unless your name is John Finkel, it's just going to keep happening to you.
Yeah, like there are very few players who like get to the Pro Tour and have like unreal success, right? I mean, if you want like the highest win percentage LSV. The highest top 8 percentage, John Finkel, Paulo Vitor Dama Rosa, Li Shitian. Those 4 players, Casey can record me saying this about Li Shitian. Those are probably the 4 best players of all time. Like, their stats might not reflect it, but like after looking at it, it's like if you want to compete at the highest level, highest win percentage, LSV. Highest top 8, most number of top 8s, John Finkel. He has the longest career with the most top 8s. Highest top 8 percentage, Paulo Vitor Dama Rosa and Li Shitian. Those are the people, right? Like, what are they doing differently than you? Because it's really easy to sit there and say, I'm good. I'm as good as them. But like, are you as good as them? Are you top 8ing 1 in every 4 Pro Tours like PV and Li Shitian? Literally, 1 in every 4 Pro Tours they've ever competed in, those 2 have top 8'd. It's actually better than that. I think they're both at like 27% of Pro Tours they play in, they top 8.
And realistically, it's probably better than that because they probably weren't as good as they are now the
Right.
first time they qualified for a Pro Tour,
Well,
right?
PV probably has I think he actually has a decline. But Li Shitian actually, I think, is 1 in every 4.
I would imagine most people, though, like, it's a lot easier. You can be a lot worse and qualify for a right.
That's an insane stat. Every 4 Pro Tours you play in, you top 8 1. Or John Finkel, right? You have, is it 14 or 15 top 8s, right? Like, you can sit there and say, I'm as good as the pros, but are you? Like, what makes you say that? Like, you're saying, like, oh, I don't put in the effort. I don't. What are you not doing? And we've often preached on this podcast, like, Michael and I, we are not sitting here telling you we are the thing that you need to be Paulo, to be John, to be LSV, right? We're not saying that. We're saying what we're learning as we're trying to become that, right?
Right. And mostly, not being remotely close.
Yeah, we're not even close.
Not even sort of close. I mean, people just like, it's really interesting. Just playing against someone who is like much better than you when you're already not terrible. It's kind of sobering, right? Like when you play against someone and they just like you just understand 2/3 the way through the match, like, yeah, I mean, I might win because there's some luck involved in this game, but I don't deserve to win.
Michael, I would like to bring up a moment. I kind of want it is limited, but I'm actually interested on your perspective. So we're at GP San Jose, right? And you asked me, you're like, Spencer, how do all of your draft decks look the same? Like, what do you do to do that? And I kind of told you what I did. You go do your second. Was it your second draft or your first draft?
Second draft.
You go do your second draft. You come back. You're like, oh my gosh, that worked perfectly. Thank you so much. Like, what is it that you like? You obviously went out of your way to ask me, right? Like, Spencer, all your draft decks look the same. How do you do that? But what? It's not. I'm not Ben Stark. Why? Like, you. It doesn't matter who you ask, right? It's about absorbing information. So, like, why did you reach out to me as the person of the 4 people we were with?
I mean, I think in that scenario, I noticed, like, I think I 2-1'd with my first draft deck, but the deck was like not great. And more when I was drafting it, I had a lot of good cards in my deck, but I didn't think my deck was very cohesive. And I felt like I was sort of scrambling as I was drafting it. Like, I was trying to pivot too late, and just trying to talk to you about like what your thought process was helpful to me there, because it just gave me a different outlook on sort of if you're able to like that sometimes it's correct based on the cards you have to try to force something rather than just be super open and take what comes to you, right? That you can sort of dictate what is going to come to you. And I had that feeling. I remember in pack 3, I think this was Aether of Volkaladesh, but I got past like 2 Thriving Rhinos, a Riparian Tiger, and a Nature's Way.
And you did that by taking green cards pack 1, right?
Right, by taking every green card. Like literally every green card.
And this is a specific draft strategy for those who don't know. There are 2 ways that I draft. and this where it's the super stay open plan, or it's the take the the best on color cards or close to for the first couple picks, and if you see a trend, stay like kind of pick a lane and stay in that lane, and then like whatever you didn't see coming the other direction, right? So like for example, for Michael, it's like, okay, green card, green card, green card, take. All right, I saw no black cards. Okay, I'm gonna make a guess here. I'm gonna say that black is gonna be flowing the other way because I didn't pass any black. And then you go black, and then the other way you go green when it comes back, right? And that's
right.
That's
yeah. It was. I believe it was green and red, but it was like
sure
half my green cards, all my red cards, half my green cards.
Yep.
In pack 1, 2, and 3, and just sort of, I think sometimes seeing something actually work for you is really motivating in the sense that you're like, okay, there are ways to actually get better at this. Like,
I think it was it was a 3-point pro point finish for you that weekend.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I 3-0'd that second draft. Deck was really good.
It was a great finish for you, and like honestly, there are times where you need to like look at like, where am I on this magical hill? Where am I sitting? Like, what am I doing? Because you can sit here and say like, I'm like, Michael could have sat there and said, I'm gonna hit silver this year. I don't need to learn anything. I'm gonna hit silver. But instead he's like, if I'm gonna go to limited GPs, like Spencer is a better drafter than me. Like, Spencer, what are you doing? Like, how did you get this deck? Like, what did you do in this, right? Or you could go to Alex. Like, Alex, like, you play draft differently than most of my friends. Alex, how do you play draft? Like, how do you make the decisions you make in draft? And that's what Michael is doing. And that right there is forcing you to gain those XP points that we said don't exist, right? Like, you're actively making decisions. This is why it's a complicated RPG. It's not a
well, and I think what maybe is interesting is that like a lot of the time when you're first playing or you're just not very good yet, you can get better really passively. Like mainly just playing more, you get a lot better. You don't really have to like, if you haven't played FNM before, you've like literally never drafted, right? If you draft 10 times, you're like going to be a lot better than you were before 10 drafts or before you played 10 FNMs or whatever. But like everything, I mean, just like it's in literally funny. Everything, you just hit a wall, right? Where it's like, okay, so this is where I can get to.
I actually have a thought on leveling up from what you just said. So it's like the first 10 levels are all from like punching and killing opponents, right? It's like you like gain XP for every opponent you kill in Magic for the first like X number of levels, right? But after that, all of it's through story mode. You have to actually complete quests and like interact with people to actually gain more levels.
Yeah, you mostly just have to like take an active role in your own learning. I think just expecting to get better through osmosis is
exactly
not going to happen at some point.
It changes from like repetition to repetition plus, right? Like you still have to have repetition. If you don't have it, like you're gonna slack somewhere, but you also have to do other things.
Definitely. So you just got to keep working at it.
Let's talk about those little things really quick. So I have things that are built into mechanics, and the mechanics as kind of a topic here. So we have the little things. You actually have to do the little things to constantly be leveling up. You have to understand attacking, you have to understand blocking, you have to understand card advantage, and you have to understand your mechanics. Like, Michael, surprisingly, I'm really terrible at attacking.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too is like it's deck and format dependent, right? It's like if you're giving up points because if you're giving up damage because you're just not attacking because you're scared to trade in situations you should be okay with trading, you're going to lose, right? Like if you're playing like Death and Taxes in Legacy, I think is the perfect example of this, right? Like you really have to know when you're allowed to trade and when you're not allowed to trade. Because if you're trying to trade on a board that like you're not supposed to trade on, or you're trading the wrong creatures attacking or blocking, you will just lose. But so, if you're missing, 6-8 points of damage in a game because you're scared of doing so, that's going to cost you a ton of games too. So I think a lot of it is just like it's understanding of format. Like in Aether Revolt Limited, for example, right? Because of Revolt, blocking was often terrible. But that also means that, like, even if you don't have Revolt cards in your hand, you could expect your opponent not to block in situations where they might normally, right? Like there are all kinds, and it's just very context dependent.
I just got a Facebook message asking me what I'm drinking, and it's it's Rockstar Rehab Orange. It's really good. So this podcast is brought to you by Rockstar. Not really. So I actually have some thoughts on this, Michael. And I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
This week I made a post that I got emails about. People did not like my post, where I said, I agree with Shaheen Sarani. I find it significantly easier to play control decks than aggro decks. Here's the reason. And I think this makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure why it's like a point of contention. So when you first start playing Magic, people are like, play an aggro deck. You'll win a lot more if you just start with aggro, attack, right?
Sure.
However, once you get better at Magic, it's a lot easier to be blocking because Magic actually favors people that are blocking and reacting.
If the skill level differential is significant, especially, right?
Yes. So for me, I prefer blocking and reacting to attacking because once you get really good at Magic, like really good, it is really hard to attack because you have to know, right? Like when you make that decision to attack, once you've gotten like really good at Magic, you better be right. Because if you're wrong, you get punished.
Right. I mean, if your opponent is able to anticipate what's going to happen, and understands
specifically
like how to
better
value
than you are, right?
Right. If they value your cards better than you value your cards, it is problematic. And blocking, you just have less choices most of the time, I would say. Like playing like Torrential Gearhulk, right? You don't really get that many chances to block. Right? Like there's some with like countering spells or whatever, but I think combat specifically, how to play, and I think this is true in Limited a lot too, like how to play around combat tricks, how to play with combat tricks. It's just incredibly complex. And I can totally see why you would think that playing decks where, like, if you're attacking with your Torrential Gearhulk, the game is probably just over.
Oh, right? Like
It's really obvious.
Yeah, we'll probably do a podcast. Maybe we'll invite Quentin back on. Quentin Pierce, he's a former host of the show. Well, I'll probably invite him back on to like do a podcast on pivoting, where like we talk about like when you pivot your role, where it's like, all right, we've closed the game out. There's no way they can win. It's time to start attacking with our Torrential Gearhulks, right? But like, those are
a lot more obvious in some.
They are
decks than others.
so much more obvious than like. So this week, one of my misplays, I talked about game day. I counted as though I had my opponent dead, my opponent being Chris. And so I took a line. I'm like, okay, this plus this equals this. Okay, all right, attack. Okay, pump, and I was playing Pummeler, and I'm like, okay, pump, you're dead. He's like, I know that's only 4, not 6. I go to 2, and I lost the game. And like, I could have easily just played a Bristling Hydra instead of what I did that I spent my 4 mana on, and he probably could have never won. But
right.
Like that's how much harder attacking is. Like if you mess up on an attack, you're gonna lose. If you mess up on when you mess up on a block, it's usually much more forgiving.
Well, I think that a lot of the decks that are blocking more regularly are just more forgiving. The power level of your cards is higher, and you'll lose games where you just get run over. But like, you can make more mistakes playing Siege Rhino than you can make mistakes playing Acro and Crusader. Right?
Yeah.
Like there's one where it's like, we're going to try to scrape over the finish line every game, and I'm going to kill you by 1, at least in every game that's remotely contentious. And there's one where like, yeah, I mean, you can end up in matchups where you can have matchups where attacking and blocking is difficult, but I think ultimately you just have a lot more to draw to, right? Like if I'm playing Siege Rhino or whatever, or Elspeth Sun's Champion, if I just have those kind of cards in my deck, I can play pretty badly, but be good at drawing the better cards. Whereas if I'm playing...
Surprisingly, like Supreme Verdict catches you up a lot when you make mistakes.
Right. Like you just have a bunch of cards that are so many for ones that you can like miss things here and there and just win anyways. And I think that a lot of people suggest aggro decks for kind of the same, like there are matchups where you just don't have to make a lot of decisions with aggro decks. Your decisions are play all your spells every turn. But as you get to a slight, and then attack with everything more or less. But as you get to like a slightly higher level, as you're not quite as bad as you were before, and your opponents are not quite as bad as they were before, I definitely agree that that's a lot less true. I mean, I think of like Craig Wesco basically playing, you know, white weenie variants in like every event for the last 10 years. And
well, there's a few things that I think of on this. One of them is just like, okay, how do I explain this? So, we went into like a completely separate training grounds all of a sudden, but one thing that I'll wrap this up by saying, like, when, like, you have to understand at least the basics of both of these, right? You have to know at least some amount of the time when it's correct to attack and when it's correct to block. Here's the thing: is there is equity at the basic level of Magic. I think it was Cedric Phillips recorded a video where he was like, "I'm going to record a video where I attack with every guy every single turn and see what percentage of games I win."
Right. The answer is probably not very many.
No, it was a lot.
Sure.
So I think he was playing like mono white humans at the time, like back at like, or red white human. Either way, it was like some hyper aggressive deck. He's like, okay, like I'm gonna make the best play that's activating guys, and then also like maximizing damage every turn and see what percentage of games I win. And it was like over 60. So that is why people recommend aggro decks early on. The truth is that once you get to that percentage where you're like getting there, is that you're going to probably feel like you're good enough to move on to the next level, right? Whether that's PPTQs, RPTQs, GPs, Magic Online, competitive events, whatever it is, you are like, okay, well, I'm good enough to do this now. And then all of a sudden the whole world changes. And it's then that things start to change, where you have to consider card advantage and mechanics, right? These are the other little things you need to consider, where it's like, what does this play do to the card advantage aspect of the game, right? Like, where am I at? Like, what was my card worth in this? What was their card worth? How did this end up?
Right.
And like, it's kind of like putting like a plus minus card counting aspect to the game. Like, where are you at on cards? And that is a weird thing to think about.
Well, but as your creatures get more complex, these decisions get increasingly more complex too, right? Like, it's a lot harder to figure out when you should attack with, you know, Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, than it is to figure out if you should attack with Thalia's Lieutenant.
Yeah.
Right. Like, how much is damage worth? Like, when your cards actually do other things, that's when this whole thing starts getting really complex, right? I mean, there's a reason basically no one ever attacks with Mother of Runes.
Yeah.
Right. But there's so much to attacking and blocking. And I think in general, a lot of it is just like finding the decks that are in your comfort level if you're looking to maximize short-term success.
I want to talk really quick about, so I think that it's pretty clear, if we didn't make this clear, that neither of us actually believe in level ups. Like, they're not real. They're not a thing that exists. And I want to be clear about the next thing that I don't believe in. I don't believe if you have a child in the car, please plug their ears. I don't believe in the bullshit that is mind tricks and bullshit like that. Like, I actually believe it's crap. It's complete crap. The number of times that people have suggested things to me, they're like, well, why don't you do that? You're just hemorrhaging value not to do that. Like, there are times where it's correct. Like, watching the number of cards your opponent brings in can be correct in certain matchups. But every single game of Magic you play, watching the number of cards that somebody sideboards in is complete BS.
As is sideboarding in 15 cards and then pulling them back out. I mean, I'm pretty sure the last time I tried to do that, I then missed a card and then drew it. So
Dude, I did this. So I actually stopped doing that. I advocated. So episode constructive criticism. I think it was like episode 7. I actually advocated for doing that. I actually don't do that anymore because it is complete waste. So I will do it if I don't know how I want. Like if I'm in a matchup and I'm like, how do I want to sideboard? I'll actually board all 15 in and then do it. Be
and
like,
then just try to not think about it as sideboarding, but building the best 60 out of your 75s.
exactly.
But I agree for like denying information, right? Like, okay, so if I'm playing a red deck and I have like in Legacy, right? Like, and my opponent is playing blue, I'm not fooling anyone that I'm like not boarding in my red blasts, right? They know. Like you basically, it's about having respect for your opponent,
yes.
right? Like,
and there are exceptions to every rule, right? Like on the First Strike podcast, Rob Lombardi told a story where his opponent boarded in the what is the artifact card that we just talked about for like 20 minutes on this podcast, the Lost Legacy effect.
Dispossess?
Yeah. So his opponent casts a Dispossess against their deck, and he like goes through the deck and he's like, "Oh, did you board out Marvel?" Because they were playing the Rug Elder Deep Fiend deck. They actually weren't playing Marvel, and then the guy like thinks for a second and goes, "Oh, did I?" Oh, and then like, so he obviously that person loses that game because they paid 3 mana and discarded a card. So the next game, he then is like grabs his sideboard, jams all 15 in, and then sideboards out 15, the same 15, right? That is a situation where you make them think like, am I supposed to board out these dispossesses?
Right. So, and I mean, I get that kind of stuff is like relevant
that
sometimes,
exists,
but
right?
but mostly, unless your opponent gives you a specific reason not to like think they're not terrible, it's just a waste of time. It's a waste of mental energy, and it's.
I'm gonna be real right here. So I think over the last probably 50 episodes, I've given multiple instances where I'm like, don't do this. It's a waste of energy, to the point where I actually don't remember the tips I've given. Like, I have erased the things from my memory that I told you guys not to do. Because I don't need to spend the mental energy to do them. Because they actually don't make me better at Magic. So, there's a lot of people that are like, so for example, I have used the pen trick. I've done it. I have won matches because of the pen trick. And it's interesting to know that the pen trick is at your disposal. But like,
sure, but if your opponent is good, right?
Yeah, there's a very clear circumstance in which you should use the pen trick. It's not like every time you use the pen trick, it's going to work. You have to know. You have to know it's going to work.
Well,
and I think there's a lot of those.
I mean, the main thing is like, if you give your opponent credit for being able to figure out what attacks and blocks should look like based on the information they have, if you believe your opponent is capable of doing that, the pen trick doesn't work.
I actually, so
right, like you're not going to convince a good player to attack you with a bad attack by grabbing a pen. Like it's just not a thing.
So I am probably like the lowest on the level of Travis Wu fans. Like, if there's a person that like doesn't appreciate Travis Wu, it's me. However, there is something I appreciate him about, and that is what he does in a match of Magic. That he did not. By the way, I played against Travis Wu, and he didn't used to do this, and he has adopted this thing where he will literally say out loud everything he is thinking. I don't hate this. Like, I thought about it a lot, and I'm like, okay, like, let's pretend that you're giving them information 100% of the time that you do this. You're still giving yourself the best play if they have that information. Right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can kind of see that. I ultimately just feel like, basically, if you're having to expend very much mental energy on any sort of thing where you're trying to get your opponent, like the first time
it's not worth it.
The first time you like draw a rest in peace that you sided in because you were boarding all 15 cards in and you accidentally missed one siding it out, you're just gonna be like, oh man, there's no possible. But I mean that kind of stuff happens, right? Like if you side in 15 cards and then side out 15 cards enough, I guarantee you eventually you will make a mistake.
Yes, you will.
Like,
It's too hard. It's just too many cards. It's super true. You would have to have like your sideboard composition memorized for like every matchup. Uh, and these things exist in a lot of different places. I would just say that like mind tricks are not worth it. Just don't do them. Like,
most just try to get better yourself, right?
yeah,
It's
just
just
like
there's so much to focus on already.
just play better Magic. So PV is like a friend of mine. Like if I sent PV a text right now, he would answer any question that I gave him. And we've talked about this kind of stuff. And like this like he believes it's BS. So don't take my word for it. Take PV's word for it. It's BS. Don't do it. It's BS. Just don't try. Like just play good Magic. Like don't try and gain edges through rules loitering. Don't try and gain edges through collusion. Like just play your matches of Magic. Play the best Magic you can. You will win more matches, and you will spend less mental energy than you are in whatever you're doing. I I think that this is pretty clear when it comes to like cheaters. So something that you can think about pretty clearly is like when a player is a cheater, they spend a lot of mental energy deciding when to cheat and how to cheat, right? Like
Yeah.
they have to make that like, do I cheat now? Like when do I cheat? And honestly, it is not different than a mind trick. You do like you are spending every turn of your game, at least somewhere in your head, deciding whether or not you're going to try and pull this mind trick. It's actually just not that different than trying to decide if you're going to cheat. And honestly, that mental energy is taken away from somewhere. Your brain can only handle so much. And you are saying, where do I want to spend this mental energy? And you are deciding not to do it in a game of Magic. You're deciding to put it somewhere else. You are not putting it in your mechanics. You're not putting it in your attacking. You're not putting it in your blocking. You're putting your mental energy in a place that, like, honestly, probably doesn't matter 99.9% of games.
Yeah, I think the thing is like it's easy for it to stick with you when it does, in the sense that
Oh yeah, because it feels great.
right, because it feels like you're really getting someone. But I think most of the time you are just better off just trying to play the best Magic you can, trying to learn from the people around you, and trying to like just you only have so much time, you only have so much energy. It's you know where it really should go.
So, Michael, if you were to sum up like level ups, how would you do it?
So I don't think you can really level up in the sense that like you'll be bad one day and then something just clicks and now you're great. But what I would say is maybe periodically you'll notice that like something you used to be bad at, you're getting better at. I think that happens more when you have played less, just because it's maybe less of like a concerted effort thing. Like most of the things I find myself getting better at, it's mostly because I'm like trying pretty hard to get better at. But sometimes you'll like, I don't know, you'll mulligan a hand, or you'll just play a game and you'll be like, I don't think I would have won that game 6 months ago. And I think in that sense, maybe less. It's like slow uphill progression, right? But that
right.
When you notice that, it's really rewarding.
I think the notice thing is like really important there, right? Like we talked at the beginning of this segment about looking back. I mean, like I didn't know that I needed to know that. Like I had no idea. How would I have known that that was important? Because I didn't know that it was important.
Right.
And it like sounds like semantics and it sounds like complete BS, but it's absolutely true. When somebody comes up to you and asks, why did you make that play? If you don't have an answer for them, if you don't have an answer, right? It's like, why did I make what? I did it because it seemed like the best play. Well, that's not an answer. Like, why did you do that? What led you to the decision that you made is way more important than the decision that you made. Because
Yeah,
at the end
I
of the,
agree with that.
at the end of the day, that's actually how you're going to level up.
Yeah, I think through like introspection, right? If you
Yeah.
can look at why you did what you did, then you can say either this was good and it didn't work out, or, you know, it was good and it did work out, or it was bad and it didn't work out, right? And if you can sort of break it down into one of those categories, you're just a lot more likely to be able to improve in the future.
Yep. I couldn't have said it better. So that is it for this week on the Training Grounds. You can support this podcast by going to patreon.com/ccmtg to become a patron of this show. Starting at 500. So there's a while where I hid the amount of money we were making. So right now, in case you're wondering, we make $329 per month. At $500 per month, I will start paying Danny, Michael, and now our executive producer Mason a little bit of cash. They'll make a little bit of money. Obviously, like I'm paying I borrowed money to pay my bills. Like I'll pay it back, but like these guys do a lot and they deserve a lot. I actually want to give a special shout out. Actually, so it might not seem like a lot, but Mason posting that we're doing the episode every week through multiple avenues, asking me for the show notes to remind me to do them, and like all of the stuff he's doing right now is like, I honestly feel like 50 pounds of pressure has been lifted off my shoulders and like moved. It feels really good because I have asked multiple co-hosts to do what Mason is doing and they wouldn't do it. And Mason is not like, he's here on this call right now that we're doing live, and he is not like, he's not even on the show and he's doing these things for me. And yeah, thank you. If you can't hear this, it's like it is I can actually feel it right now. Like it's like things are lifted off my shoulders. So thank you to Mason for that. And if you want to help Mason, Michael, and Danny, who are like the people making this show possible, because like if not, I'd just be like sitting here talking by myself, which would be weird.
Yeah.
Go donate. Go donate to the Patreon. It is going to get these guys paid, and we would really appreciate it. So thank you to everybody doing it. Michael, where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook. My name is Michael Hindrocker. You can also find me on Twitter at MagicMikeMTG.
What just happened? Mason, did you just retweet and favorite a tweet of mine while we were on this? What? What is happening right now? All right. So first of all, I want to just say that like, all right, let's be clear. This just needs to be added to the show notes. Mason, activate your audio really quick.
All right, I'm in. They can hear me.
Mason, where can people find you?
They can find me at SOV Mason on Twitter, and they can find me at Mason Clark on Facebook. You'll find me in the Facebook group promoting the thing every day with Twitch and stuff like that.
Mason, really quick for the people listening, why are you a patron of Constructive Criticism?
There's a couple of reasons. So I make content for another game that was very similar to your content and the way we do things. So when I found your content, it really connected because it was like I'm preaching all these things in a different avenue, and it really like connected. And then I truly believe that like you're one of the top 3 best Magic podcasts out there when it comes to just like core information about improving at the game. And I was really glad that the Level Up episode wasn't about like moments, because I don't think moments exist like you guys. So that was a nice surprise, and that wasn't in the show notes for me. But yeah, I think the show is really good at a few things, like conveying the idea of always improving, talking about things, talking about why you do the things, and focus on these training grounds. And that made me want to support the show, and also made me want to like reach out to you and say, hey, I'm willing to like host because I don't know if they know this or not, but like everything's going through my computer right now on my internet, because Spencer and Michael just have the worst internet in the world. So
yeah,
so
Utah Comcast is the worst.
So this should be short-lived. I should be getting Google Fiber on Wednesday.
Yeah, I heard that like
really?
I
hate you. I hate you.
Common sentiment, I understand.
I knew you had it. When you were like, I don't have fiber, I was like, I don't believe you.
Yeah, but in my thought, I just think that there are a lot of things you guys do that are great. And I really do think you're one of the
Well-
best podcasts. So I wanted to be able to help.
So I didn't until
No, he's gone.
I didn't until
Yeah. Speaking of fiber, Michael doesn't have it right now.
Yeah.
So you can find me on Twitter at Spencer13H. You can find me on Facebook at Spencer Stephen Howland. You can join the Constructorism Facebook group, be a part of the show every week. We post so much in there. If you want to be around people that want to improve at Magic the way that you do, join the Constructorism Facebook group. It is a great place to try and improve at Magic. You can go to our bio page where you can join through the Discord channel. There's just links for everything there.
I see.
Michael is back. You can join the clan by messaging me on MTGO.
Yeah, that's what I got for. That's what I got for.
Michael is.
You could Comcast
having-
real quick when I said
Yeah.
this. As soon as I said that, it just was like boom. Yeah.
Comcast heard Michael talk crap that he's getting fiber and then he lost connection.
Yeah, see, that's the problem with using a microphone and stuff. They can definitely hear you.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the anyway. You can join the clan by messaging me at Spencer13Dev on MTGO. Let's wrap this up with hashtag Would That Be Good. So hashtag Would That Be Good is our Twitter outreach program. If you tweet it, we will read it. All right. So we start with what is happening right now? There's so many this week.
Hold on, I'll guess.
So we have.
It would not be the 15th because we went on Tuesday last week. So it would actually be Mason tweeting, "We need opinions here. Wendy's should be higher," releasing a poll of fast food burgers, which goes Five Guys, In-N-Out, Shake Shack, Wendy's, Culver's, Whataburger,
Wrong.
McDonald's,
Wrong.
Smash Burger,
Wrong.
Steak and Shake.
Wrong. Oh my gosh. This is the most wrong thing I've ever seen. Number one, Shake Shack. It's not close. If you want burgers, it is number one, Shake Shack. Number
it's
two.
3. That's fine.
What?
It's in the top 3. It's within the margin of error.
Number 2, Five Guys. Number 3, Smash Burger. And
then
then
you just give up, don't care.
Don't eat the rest of them. Like,
That's really the thing. It's more of like a binary scale, right?
yeah,
It's more like, would I eat
It's-
a burger from here or not?
yeah. So here's the thing: is that Wendy's actually was higher up like 2 years ago, but did their founder die or something? So like something happened. They like changed their commercials. They like changed everything, and then all of a sudden their food sucked.
Yeah, the last Wendy's burger I had was not great, but you know,
It's so weird because like 5 years ago it was like, you need fast food, okay, go to Wendy's. Like it's the only like reasonable fast food on the planet. And now it's like you can't eat that. I don't actually know how Smash Burger could possibly be below any of these. And also, In-N-Out is the most overrated thing next to the Beatles in the history of mankind. I actually literally had a conversation with Michael about this on Wednesday.
that is true. So, you know, maybe you just were secretly reading Mason's tweet and it, you know.
I literally didn't see this. I'm actually upset. I'm actually upset. Have you had Smash Burger? Who read this and ate Smash Burger and voted on it? Like, what?
Yeah, and put it below McDonald's.
Like,
That's brutal.
What?
Yeah, it seems questionable to me too.
It's just wrong. We have to move on.
All right.
What's the next tweet?
Andrew Elliott says, myself and SOV Mason teaming up for SCG Atlanta, hashtag would that be good? Then replies to himself saying, hashtag the Bachelor for value. Hashtag would that be good?
Two things. One, teaming up with Mason seems like bad value because I don't even know if he exists yet. I'm still not sure if he's Austin or not.
Could be
So
Austin.
like, yeah, exactly. So that just seems like bad value. Second of all, this next tweet.
Are you implying you don't want to be teamed up with Austin? Yeah, I'm gonna say that feels like a lot less of a Mason
on.
dagger than an Austin
I
dagger.
I feel like people are implying that I'm daggering Austin here. All I'm saying is that Mason is the only person on the planet that is pro Austin, and that seems weird.
Sure, but if he really is Austin, then teaming up with Austin doesn't sound that bad. I mean, not to the point that I publicly declare I'm going to avoid it.
So you can't talk while Mason is talking where you guys can't hear it, and it's making Michael laugh, and that's inappropriate.
But apparently, Mason is also unaware of this, because the next tweet is, "We are teaming up, #news to me, would that be good, #awkward."
But the next tweet is #daggers, would that be good. So I have a question. Is Mason and Andrew the only two teaming up? Like, what does teaming up mean? Is it like 2HG?
Well,
is
Austin and Mason can play. Austin and Mason. No, this was for SCG Atlanta. So Austin and Mason can both be on the same team. It's just implied.
No, that can't happen because they're the same person.
Well, we'd find out
if
if
anyone
they're the same
sends a
person or
picture of
not.
both of their DCI numbers, because I feel like that's the only evidence that will convince me otherwise.
Believe me, you can get multiple DCI numbers. That is not a limiting factor.
If you go on national TV to find a spouse, it's because you are self-absorbed, not because you want a successful marriage. With that be good.
Yeah, I agree with that. Ultimately,
there are multiple successful bachelor couples.
You can be a successful bachelor couple if you're both equally self-absorbed.
So I believe that there are people that they specifically cast to be the people that you watch the show about, and then there are people that they cast to actually be the significant, like to win the show, right? Like it's like, oh, we actually could see you two together.
Sure, but
there are people that are like, oh, you're never going to win this show, but man, will you be fun to watch?
Yeah, but the idea that like you really need to, be on a reality show to find a spouse is,
So, Michael, you and I are weird. Like, we are not the like, let's be clear. How long have you been with your significant other?
Almost 10 years.
And when did that start?
I mean, by definition, almost 10 years, like 18.
Okay. And so Devonair and I were best friends in high school when we were 18, and we are now married. And I got it's almost 10 years also. Like, it's just.
So, like, there are just lots of ways I would choose
to talk to, right?
So that's true. I'm not arguing that. I'm mostly just like, if I was looking for like places to find a love interest, I think reality TV might actually be like, last on the list. Like the actual basement.
There are so many Bachelorette tweets. I just said I banned these. What is happening? All right. So testing and making cyber plans for a PPTQ tomorrow while my boys Jacob and Holy
Tomatoes. Jacob and Ryan, but
go to kill it in
was
Louisville.
A good Twitter handle, so I'm gonna shout that out.
So I'm out. Adrian actually did win his PPTQ.
Yeah, so congratulations.
So whatever you did,
well.
I believe it's Adrian's first PPTQ win. Adrian has been a patron of $25 or more per month for 3 months. So I've been doing playtesting with him. Michael also has been doing playtesting with him. It's one of the Patreon benefits of $25 per month. And to be honest, Adrian didn't need it. Dude was just like always trying to improve.
No, I'm happy for him. It's really awesome. It's a really good feeling to win a PPTQ.
Yeah, especially your first one. Like that monkey's off your back. I promise it will be easier to win your next one. That is one of those things where like you like lose the pressure and it feels really good. So congratulations to Adrian. Lander says better luck. #better luck in the good. First draft, pack one, pick one bonus. A second draft, pack one, pick one Vizier. Prize pack. What is that?
Invocation days.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I wish there was an Invocation Wasteland, because just to tilt people, I would want to play all Invocation Delver. What does that do? It means your spell doesn't work. Your land dies. I feel like if you could have because you could have Spell Pierce, Daze, Stifle, Force, and I guess you could play Expedition Wasteland, but I want them to all be equally unreadable.
Yeah, so Delver should have been in there.
Well, Delver would be a weird one. You know, the flip-sided invocation would be a challenge, but
Oh, actually, that might be. So I actually, in paper, I've actually really enjoyed these. Like looking at them, like they do not look good as pictures. Let's be clear. When you like look at these as a picture, you're like, what is that? What does that say? But if you actually hold it in your hand, it actually looks really sweet.
I think they're kind of cool. They just don't really look like Magic cards. So
I said, patrons of CCMTG, post your patron participation questions to this thread to hear them on the show. Hashtag would that be good? Yeah, so if you are a patron, please post to that thread. We'll use that thread for a couple months. And yeah, we're really excited about it. So thank you to everybody who's already posted there. We will use your questions.
yeah, absolutely.
Mason from the CCMTG account tweeted, don't miss tonight's episode of CC. Gosh darn it. I have literally for 2 years tried to get away from CC, and you ruined it in one tweet, Mason. Focused on leveling up. Watch live on Twitch at 10 p.m. EST. I like that he used the red mushroom because we talked about it this week.
Yeah. No, this graphic is great.
At SOV Mason, it's time again, bro. Hashtag the Bachelor. Hashtag with the good. Really?
Yeah, this is all our Twitter feed is now. It's great.
This is it. This is what we've done. It is my wife's fault. I literally probably won't watch. So I actually don't watch The Bachelorette, and Michael isn't at my house on Mondays anymore, so he doesn't watch any of it.
Yeah, it's kind of true. I mean,
like he'll never know about nanny situations again.
It's kind of. I mean, that part is a little disappointing, but you know, it is what it is.
Hang on, executive producer stepping in here. As executive producer, I'll make sure that Michael gets the good ones, so he's in the loop. Hashtag always improving.
What does that mean? I don't know what that means. Mason says, I would be watching American Gods and The Leftovers and The Bachelorette, but instead producing at CCMTG. We do appreciate that, and it seems better than The Bachelorette. And I haven't watched American Gods yet. Have you watched that, Michael?
No, I haven't watched. I also don't know what The Leftovers is.
I don't know either of those are. American Gods does sound great to me, though. We should both watch it and get back to Mason on that. Andrew Elliott says, at CCMTG, at Spencer39H, SCG locked down the CW as a sponsor for the Invitational, SCG Invitational on TV, hashtag will it be good. So they, from my understanding, ESPN still wanted the Pro Tour. We being Magic the Gathering, actually declined ESPN. It actually wasn't the other way around. They didn't want the whole Pro Tour. They wanted the top 8. And Magic was like, no, we want to stream the whole thing.
Yeah, it makes sense, though. Like, I don't especially think that Magic the Gathering is well suited for ESPN.
It's really, even for the CW, right? Like, the CW actually can't take 13 hours of its day to stream the Invitational. I just don't think that will happen.
Well, but it could be, you could broadcast just the top 8 for that. They might be more willing to compromise. I don't know. I mean, I am always interested in seeing sponsorships for Magic.
Have you watched the Dota or the Counter-Strike stuff on TV? How does that work?
No, I haven't. I mean, I've watched some of that stuff on Twitch, but never on TV.
I did watch Counter-Strike on TV, but it was like a championship. So it was like players playing in a championship. I don't know how it would work for Magic because Magic is such a long event. It's like a really...
Well, it's a long event. It's also just very specialized. It's really hard. Like, so Counter-Strike or something like Dota, like you can kind of watch it even if you don't really know what's happening, but it's like, there's action, right? So you can sort of appreciate it on different levels. Magic is literally just gibberish if you don't already get it.
Yep. Yeah.
It's tough for like a general crowd. That surprises me. But you know, you never know. I have no idea what that arrangement looks like. I have no idea what the goals are, but I think I'm happy for Star City Games if that's a sponsorship they wanted to lock down.
Mason says, producing the newest episode of CCMTG while in Moto, my opponent is clocking me. Send help. Hashtag would be good. So my understanding is that Mason's opponent was playing
New Perspectives, which just takes forever. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't have a problem with that.
So did you send help? We should have just signed up his opponent for Comcast. That would have sent help.
So, Michael, what did you learn this week?
Well, I learned not to call out my internet provider
Live.
into the microphone. It just doesn't go well. I also learned more about sort of how we both feel about Magic being sort of a game of continuous improvement rather than really big jumps.
So I learned a few things on this podcast. One of which being that I'm unlucky and I don't get fiber before you. But I actually do want to speak about that. We have around 8,000 to 10,000 people listening to this podcast every week. I'm pretty open about our numbers. Like, I'm willing to tell people what we get. It's not close to LR. It's more than some of the top podcasts on MTG Cast, but I'm willing to be open with you guys. To my 8,000 to 10,000 listeners today, I hope that every single one of you cancels their Comcast. If you have any other option, I encourage you to cancel Comcast and tell them it was me. When you cancel it, say, Spencer Howland told me to do this. Because
you can go so much more mean than that. Like, you don't want them to say, like, Spencer Howland hates you personally.
Here's the thing, is as somebody who's worked in customer service before, so, like, I'll call customer service and I'll be like, hey, I just want to start this call by, like, letting you know that I know none of this is your fault. But, like, let's have a conversation about, like, how we can fix this. And I'm, like, really, really nice to customer service agents. Like, really, really nice. Unless they suck. Then I'm like, listen, like, you're bad at your job. You actually didn't do anything to help me.
I mean, given that it's Comcast, I mostly expect that they're not allowed to do anything to help you. So
I love what Mason said. In fact, if you, instead of being a Patreon of constructive criticism, just cancel your Comcast and shoot me a message letting me know, and I will give you a shout out on the podcast. Like, the amount that they are not helpful to me. So I actually called them before this episode. I spent 30 minutes on the phone. You'll notice my internet didn't go out. Weird. So here's the truth. Comcast allegedly, I have to say this because, like, we're on a, like, show and, like, I don't want to get sued. Allegedly, Comcast actually takes your internet, the bits that you use, away from you when you use more than they want you to use. So, like, you'll pay for, like, 160 megs, right? But if you use 100 megs per whatever, they'll be like, no, you're using too much. I know you're paying for that, but, like, screw you. We're going to, like, take that away from you and crash your internet. They'll actually do that, allegedly. Which is stupid because I already know from conversations with agents that the second that fiber is enabled in me, they will upgrade me for free. Which means they already have fiber lines in my neighborhood. They already have it. They already are like, the second the fiber is enabled to you from any other service, we will give it to you. Means you already have a fiber line. You already could give it to me. You just won't, for who knows why. So, if you have Comcast and cancel it and send me a message, I will shout you out during this segment of the podcast. Screw you, Comcast. You suck. End of story.
That's great.
I'm just done. Like, my wife and I actually considered moving to get away from them. We actually had, like, a real conversation. We were like, all right, so we can move here. This has this has this internet. This has this internet. What would we be paying for rent? What is that versus what we're paying for Comcast? What does that do for our increased speeds? What does that do for our blah, blah, blah? We actually had that conversation. And honestly, if Mason had not offered to host the show, I actually would have done it.
That's great.
So
that's great.
What we learned is Comcast sucks. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you guys all next week.